Yeah, yeah, which it's in our passwords, but hate having to look it up. Okay, there we go. Yeah, yeah, which it's in our passwords, but yep, that was all going out.
Right. Hello, everybody, and happy Monday.
Before
Gonna,
we get going, I do want to just remind everybody that the Zoom chat is for logistics and solving tech issues only. It's not for anything that's in the public record or is actually part of the meeting.
awesome. Thank you. Good afternoon, LCC Budget Committee. Can I just get a quick thumbs up if everybody can hear us okay? Thumb, thumb, thumb. Awesome. Okay. Ron, can you hear us okay? You doing okay over there? It's all right. We'll give a thumbs up and get going. Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Campbell. If you don't remember me from last year, I'm the Director of Budget and Resource Planning. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about our upcoming budget, not the budget itself, but we'll give you an orientation onto LCC, the fund structure, and all things considered. Before we get started, I would like to go around the circle and give quick introductions. I have Alejandra at my top left, so we're going to start with you, Alejandra.
Hi, I'm Alejandra, and I'm a senior budget analyst at LCC.
Then I have Kara,
Hi, Kara Flath, Vice President of Finance and Operations. Thanks everyone for being here.
Larissa,
Hi, everyone. I'm Larissa Ennis. I use she, her pronouns. This will be my second year on the LCC Budget Committee. Good to be here. Thanks, y'all.
and Amber, you're in my center square.
Hi, everybody. I'm Amber Patterson. I'm the CFO at Burley here in Eugene, and this is my second year as well.
Thanks, Amber. Deja, gotta put your mic down.
Sorry about that. I'm Deja Grant, and I'm a budget analyst in the budget office here at LCC.
And Ron,
Yes, hi everybody. This is my second year as well, and looking forward to it.
and thank you, William.
Hi, I'm Will. This is my second year on the budget committee as well.
Okay. This is everybody we have today. We have this split up into a couple of sections just so we make sure we get everybody into an orientation. Let me just go ahead and share my screen. Won't let me share, of course. Tech, are you able to give me share privileges so I can share my screen?
It should work now.
Thank you so much. If you could give me a thumbs up or just shout really loud if you can hear my screen, see my screen. Awesome. Okay. So as you can tell, I brought all of my people with me this year to help me do this presentation and to help walk us through some of the things we're thinking about for the budget. There's myself, Alejandra, and Deja will be helping me do this presentation this year. And here's our agenda. So we knocked out introductions. We're moving along. We're going to talk about an overview of some of the trends we're seeing in higher education, just to kind of give that macro level overview of things that we're thinking about when we're planning for the upcoming years. We're going to talk about the budget development process, the structure, the timing, your roles on the committee. We'll talk a little bit about the LCC financial structure, our org structure, how we manage our finances. And then we'll talk very briefly about some just high level framework items for how we typically plan for the upcoming year. Then we'll just talk about next steps and have a little discussion. And then, of course, there's a slew of information in the last slide with that's resources for you to be able to peruse and look at on your own time. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? Okay, moving along. Here is our team. We have half of us here today. So we have Ron, we have Amber, we have Larissa and William, and then you also get to meet Jesse and Dan and Charles. And when we come up to it's the May budget hearings. These are the people you'll be sitting at the table with to help us review our budget, make recommendations, and get into the nitty-gritty conversation. Reminder, it does also include the Board of Education members. So it's this right now we have a empty seat, but we do have our 6 board members who will help us review the budget. And we'll talk about different roles and responsibilities here in a couple slides. So the way I think about this, when I think about how to orient to an upcoming budget, you're no strangers to this as financial experts yourself. I start at the very top level and start funneling my way down. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those higher education trends, and then we'll get into the more finer details of the college and our institution ourselves. Before I move on, it looks like we had a few more people join. So I think we have Charlie. Hey, Charlie, do you mind doing a quick introduction real quick?
Yeah, sorry, I could hear you guys, but I couldn't talk, so I
No
logged
worries.
back in. Yeah, Charlie Kimball, Chief Financial Officer with Murphy Company.
Okay. Thank you so much. And welcome.
Second year on the finance budget committee.
Yeah, great. Jesse, do you mind doing a quick introduction?
Hey, I'm Jesse Williams. I had the same link problem as Charlie. So I am the senior treasury analyst at the University of Oregon, and I'm new this year.
Okay. We did introductions right before you hopped on, but it sounds like maybe you were able to hear us. Either way, we'll be spending lots of time together, so no worries. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top. As y'all know, there are a lot of things happening in the world right now. So we've got considerations that we think through and talk about on a regular basis in our everyday lives here at LCC, all the way from the cabinet and presidential level to the board level, all the way down to the deans and directors and project coordinators. We have a lot of nuances and variability, challenges, headwinds, and opportunities, and things that we really kind of dig into on a regular basis. When it comes to setting our budget, there are a few things that I tried to distill down into a few topics. So we all know that there's some changes at the federal level with a lot of unknowns that indirectly flows down to our state funding. We know that there's a lot of unknowns with the economic outlook that includes revenue. It includes things like tariffs that are happening. When it comes to the perception of higher education, what areas are growing economically. We talk about enrollment. What do we think enrollment's going to do? There's a lot of variability there. We talk about how much does it cost to run a program? Does it cost for us to fulfill our mission? So we talk about things like pricing indexes. And then we also do peer-to-peer comparisons. So we look at other community colleges, the 17 community colleges here in Oregon, but also regionally and nationally to kind of help set ourselves up for success when it comes to setting things like tuition and looking at enrollment and getting a feel for what other institutions are doing. Now, I don't know how much y'all know about the federal landscape, but there's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of areas that the unknowns could impact. So we've heard about the ramp down of the Department of Ed that might be happening. There's a lot of talk about what that means for grant funding, which is across the board. There's a lot of talk and unknowns around financial aid. And when it comes to LCC as an institution, about a third of the state budget is comprised of federal funding, which means that if the state is having to reallocate and reorganize their budget, that means that it indirectly impacts everyone within the state, including LCC. We'll talk a little bit about our revenue streams here in a few slides, but roughly the state budget makes up about a third of our total budget allocation. So if there are changes at the state level, then it does have a big impact for us as an institution. We know that Medicaid expansion over the past decade has been a big topic of conversation. And if there are changes to Medicaid and we have to cover more of that in the state budget, then that means there's less budget to pull into other areas. So they might reallocate from higher education or another area to help fill that gap. Currently, the governor's budget, which is in negotiation, it's in legislation. They're debating it actually this week and next week. It's about 6% an increase over the last service level. But that could change as it goes through legislation. Typically, we don't see a lot of change from the governor's budget, but with so many unknowns, it might. The state forecast is released in May. That's something we keep a close eye on because if revenue declines or increases, they tend to change their forecast and the governor's budget based on that allocation later on in the year. So we're kind of in this really tight timing we're trying to set a budget with a lot of unknowns happening at the state level. I will share these slides afterwards so that way you can take a look at them, and we're happy to answer questions later on. We have another session that's scheduled for next Monday, so you can come back and ask more questions. I'll give the same presentation and we'll have more time to discuss. So when it comes to LCC as an institution, we roughly get about 8% of what they call the CCSF, or the community college state funding. They talk about this as total public resources for community colleges. So you'll hear me say TPR a lot. That's essentially the pie of how much is allocated to community colleges. There's a whole crazy formula that goes into how much of that piece of the pie each community college gets. And it has to do with FTE and student success, student engagement, so on. Alejandro is going to talk a little bit about that later on. But just know that generally speaking, however big that pie is, we generally get about 8%. So you can see that the total TPR, the blue line, has gone up over the last few years, but our piece of that pie has remained relatively flat. And that has a lot to do with our FTE, or a head count of how many students are here enrolled here at the college. Now, there's a lot of psychology and a lot of thought that goes into what drives enrollment. There's a lot of pieces to that, to what drives enrollment. Part of that is that we're considering now is perception. I don't know if y'all have been reading the news or following just some of the kind of general thinking out there, but there's this new perception on the horizon about what higher education means, the cost, the return on investment. And there's a lot of statistics and data out there, but regardless, there is a perception out there that's questioning the return on investment for higher education. There's a lot of data out there, but I just wanted to point out that there is a changing perception of higher education that we are thinking about when it comes to enrollment. It's not the whole picture. It's not the entire driver behind enrollment, but it is a piece of it. One thing that I saw that was interesting recently is that perception mostly leans towards the bigger colleges, bigger universities, but when it comes to the trades and community colleges, mostly we're still in the favorable category. So you can see this right-hand square here, that's at the table here. I can share this where I saw this at. I'm not debating the data behind it, but I just want to point out that there is a changing perception. That's important because we are seeing a slight uptick in our enrollment. This is our FTE by fiscal year. We know that enrollment post-COVID is back on the rise. But if you look at FY20, FY19, we still have not recovered to pre-COVID levels, but we are seeing an uptick. There is a correlation that we've seen over the past 15 or 20 years that says that when unemployment goes up, so does community college enrollment. But what we can see from this graph here, and getting back to the perception, is that might not necessarily be true anymore. And that's why we're being conservative with enrollment growth, because we don't yet know what that perception is going to do for enrollment if unemployment goes down. We think it will be fine, but we don't know for sure. And there's a whole lot more uncertainty. Whereas here you can see the orange line is the unemployment rate here in Lane County. And you can see that our enrollment generally follows that until about the COVID years. And there's a whole lot of other metrics and data and psychology that went into why that is, but we're not entirely sure what the shakeout of that's going to be in the future years. Something else that we're considering too, have y'all, just by a show of hands, have y'all heard of the demographic cliffs in higher education? Yeah, okay. What that's saying is basically there's less people born that's starting to catch up to us. That means that there are less people available in the population to enroll in community colleges. I'm not an IR specialist, so I'm saying that in very rough terms. I'm sure I'm mangling it to a certain extent. But what this graph tells us here is that we are coming up on, and if we are not already in, this demographic cliff. And recent data is actually showing that there are two cliffs that we are facing in the out years. So we're at the peak kind of right now, and we're going to start seeing demographics impact our enrollment over the upcoming out years. So that's something else that we're keeping an eye on. So it's not just perception and cost and return on investment, but it's also that there are just less people enrolling in college because there are less people available to enroll in college, to kind of distill it down into simple terms. So we talk about costs. We look at two factors to give us a pulse or a thumb, a kind of a general idea of how much things are costing. So we will see that you see from this graph that there are two metrics, basically inflation that we look at, which kind of drives the cost of things. Over the past few years, it's gone up. And now we're seeing, based on the latest data, that in FY24, it's come back down for higher education to about 3.3 or 3.4%. This metric, this factor, was a huge piece in driving the conversation around tuition setting this year. We try typically to follow the HEPI, so that's the Higher Education Price Index and the Consumer Price Index, but it doesn't always line up exactly because our unique costs might be slightly different from the general industry. It's public knowledge that we set our tuition increase at 3.1% this year, which puts the dollar per credit tuition at $149 per credit, which falls slightly below what the HEPI and the CPI is. So the last metric, the last variable that I talk about in my section before I hand it off to Alejandra is how we look against our peers. So this has a lot to do with return on investment locally. It has a lot to do with driving enrollment, especially when we're competing against online community colleges and online schools and a lot of the more hybrid options out there. When we look across the landscape at our peer institutions here in Oregon, we're probably one of the more expensive ones. We're the first or the second or the third, and we always kind of compete, if you will, if it's out for a trophy of the most expensive, of being one of the more expensive schools out there. So conversation at the board and president cabinet level, and just generally, is how in these out years can we not increase tuition for students and make it less expensive for students so that way we can help them out. There's a lot of things that go into that, but generally speaking, we do look at these other colleges and try to figure out where we land in comparison with them. So before I hand it off to Alejandra, that was a lot of information. I want to pause and see if there's any thoughts or questions before we move on. Yeah, Charlie.
So as you think about demographics and the cliff that's occurring in those various age groups, yeah, that's fairly, you're right, that's fairly common. We know that. It's one of the things we have to deal with. But has Lane County, and more particularly, if you think back over these years from, let's say, 2000 and forward, what's the population in Lane County done? It feels like we're growing, but it always feels like we're growing because we see houses being built all kinds of different places. But is there any thought that maybe that's going to give us a little bit of relief from some of this change in the demographics?
I don't know the exact data. That's a good question. I know that we were growing exponentially. All those Californians coming to our beautiful Oregon, we tell them to stay out. Just kidding. But I think that has slowed down in recent years. And I don't know what the mix of it is for people who would be enrolling in community college or higher ed. That's a good question, though, and I could find out that answer for you, just to help spark some conversation and thought. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, we can come back to it. Just shout out. We're here to answer questions for you to orient you. But for now, I'll move on. I'm going to hand it off to not Alejandra, Deja.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Oregon Budget Law basics and how the Budget Committee is involved. The Budget Committee conducts public hearings, discusses, and revises the budget with input from public comments and reviews the overall budget. We will not be reviewing the proposed budget during today's meeting as it is an orientation. Then we're going to look at budget mechanics. Ooh. In case you haven't heard, LCC has received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, for our fiscal year 24 budget document. Oregon, so that's just like an info for you. That's really cool. We're really excited about it. Oregon budget law is structured to provide comprehensive information on our expenditure history and the economic context. It also establishes standard procedures for activities such as forecasting and internal controls to ensure efficient and proper management of public funds. And right here, we have a little graph of how the process of Oregon budget law proceeds. And you can see a little arrow. That's where we are. Can you guys see the arrow?
Realized I wasn't in
Awesome.
slide.
Oh
There we
my
go.
gosh, you couldn't see the arrow. Definitely not.
Wow.
So throughout this presentation, the Oregon budget law is referenced a lot, and it outlines the expense functions, types of funds, and a lot of other key aspects. The local budgeting manual is 115 pages, excluding the applicable Oregon revised statutes and Oregon administrative rules.
I
And you
like this
guys,
slide
yeah,
because according to the HEC for our local administrators, this is like the 10 easy steps to pass a budget. But there's like obviously way more than 10 steps and people involved in passing the budget. So yeah.
here's our process calendar for our fiscal year 26 budget development. We are currently in the stage of finalizing an administrative balancing. You can see the little red arrow right there. The list of partners on the left ensure that the budgeting process is collaborative and not conducted in isolation. We don't want any silos in making this decision. When you get the slides, the little information card to the left will display all the individuals who review the budget and prior to the presentation to the board. Any questions?
Okay.
All right, thank you for that, Deja. Now we would like to take a brief moment and go over the college's financial structure, which begins with our major funds. Currently at LCC, we have 9 major funds. Each individual fund is an accounting entity with a set of self-balancing accounts. This allows us to operate each fund to organize, manage, and ensure observance of any limitations for any of those restricted uses of those resources. So I'll begin to give a brief overview. Our main primary operational fund is our general fund, followed by our Fund 2, which is our internal services fund, which is used to provide goods and services to other instructional and administrative units of the college, such as our printing and graphics warehouse and our motor pool. Our Fund 3 is our debt service fund. It is used to account for our general long-term debt, principal, and interest, largely made up of our general obligation and PERS bonds, along with our loan for Titan Court. Our Fund 4 is our capital projects fund, is used for the acquisition of land, new construction, major remodeling, and major equipment purchases. Currently, all the activity in relation to our general obligation bond can be found here. Our Fund 5 is our financial aid fund. This is used for the provision of grants, stipends, or other aid to our enrolled students. Our Fund 6 is our enterprise fund, which is used for activities that provides goods or services to students or staff for which charges or fees are assessed. Currently, the only sole operating activity here is our student housing program. Our Fund 7 is our early retirement fund, and in here, all activity related to early retirement benefits for some of our employee groups will be found here. Our Fund 8 is our special revenues fund. This fund accounts for revenues that are legally restricted to expenditures for specific purposes, such as federal um, grants and contracts. And lastly, our Fund 9 is our administratively restricted fund, a fund for which monies are administratively restricted. Activities recorded to this fund generate revenue primarily through the specifically assessed tuition and fees or through other revenue generating activities. In the slide, you will also see some examples of the programs that you will find here, such as the KLCC, our Flight Academy, and our international programs.
Anybody have any questions about our funds real quick before we move on? Because those are big funds. So I don't know if anyone has any specific questions about these. Just let us know if you have questions.
And moving along, the second tier that we use within our financial structure is our pragmatic areas. This is the way in which we group our expenditures and our other financial uses according to its purpose. We currently have 10 different categories that we use, with instruction being the largest. Some of the other pragmatic areas that we have is instructional support, which covers activities that provide support to instructional programs such as our Academic Technology Center and our Guided Pathways Department. Another crucial area is our student services, and this covers any activities to support student success and development, such as enrollment services, student life, and our Center for Accessible Resources. And a few of the others are community services, college support services, plans operations and maintenance, plans additions, financial aid, debt services, and contingencies and reserves. Within our budget document, there will be an area towards the back of the document, our appendices, and in there you will also find further explanation as to what these areas, what activities you can find within these areas. Once our purpose for our expenditures have been defined, we organize them further to the unit level. Our organizational units identify where the budget authority lies. With our units being quite extensive list, we have formed our primary organizational units, also known as our divisions, which you will see illustrated here, with academic affairs being our first, which lead our faculty and our curriculum. Finance and administration, anything related to any financial activity, our budgeting, accounting departments, procurement, and financial controls. Our facilities, which oversee the upkeep, custodial services, and repairs and bond projects. Human resources, payroll, our benefits and professional development. Our information technology, all the college-wide tech systems, hardware and software. Student affairs, similar to our other area, student support services, enrollment, wellness, and financial aid. Our marketing and public relations coordinates any college communications and outreach, with the Office of the President being one of the last divisions that we have, which provides the leadership and works with our board and governance bodies. And our fourth and final tier of our financial structure are our accounts. We use accounts to track our transactions. This helps identify the type of transaction taking place. They are most commonly seen as revenue or expenditure, or in terms of Oregon budget law, these are referred to as resources or requirements. And on this slide, you will see some of those accounts that are commonly used throughout our budget. Now to dig a little deeper, here you will see an illustration of all the revenue streams that we have when looking at all our funds. Starting from clockwise down, you will see the state support makes up 22% of that pie, with the large amount coming from CCSF, a small portion towards our grants, followed by our federal support, mainly composed of our financial aid for our students, with a small amount to our grants. Our property taxes following in closely at 19%, and then our tuition at 14%. Now, if we focus on our largest fund, which is our Fund 1, you will see that the state support makes up again one of the largest portions of our revenue, which is 34%. And our property tax will be found within this fund, which makes up 28%. And LCC actually receives property taxes from 4 counties, with Lane County being the biggest contributor. And then followed closely by our tuition, which makes up 23% of our total revenues within our Fund 1. And here on this slide is a brief overview of our state funding model from that dictates how we receive our state revenue, which is taking the total public resources, just as Jonathan had mentioned, and it uses a 3-year rolling average of FTE to assign an allocation percentage. From there, our property taxes contribution is reduced to arrive to the total biennial amount that LCC receives within 8 payments. In addition, we are now receiving student success and student support quarterly payments.
I think it's worth mentioning too that there's also there's a cap on how we do this, and it's intended to allow there to be some equity with the allocations among the 17 different colleges. So it looks at a rolling average of growth among all the colleges, and then it applies a cap within that certain year. The current cap right now on growth is about 3%, and that's been pretty consistent over the last several biennium. So it's just something to keep in the back of your mind as we talk about enrollment and state allocations.
And in this slide, we are focusing on our major expense categories within all our funds, which you can clearly see that personnel services is the largest contributor to our expense categories, coming in at 84%. And materials and services coming in at 15%. I will note that this is not including our activity for our bonds. This is just looking at all the other operational expenses.
And now, Alejandra, our bond is currently, the balance is around 100 million, I think.
Correct. And again, this is taking a closer look at our largest operating fund, which is our Fund 1. And as we saw on the previous slide, personnel services still is the highest expense category, here trending at 76%, with materials and services coming in at 23%. And this is an illustration that helps illustrate how a tuition dollar is spent here at LCC. As you can see, 54 cents of that dollar is spent on instruction, 20 cents is spent on college support services, 11 cents on student services, 7 cents on plant operations and maintenance, and the last 8 cents is spent on instructional support.
All right, so I'm going to wrap it up with just a little bit of guiding principles, some more things that we think about. We have a strategic plan that we are in the next to last year of that strategic plan, and we're in the process of revising and renewing our strategic plan. Last year will be the last year, but it focuses on a few key elements, that being student success, access, equity, and inclusion, and then also improved financial stability and sustainability. So when we include and engage with all of our stakeholders, all of our finance partners, our community members, those are the 3 elements that we use to lens how we set the budget. So we ask questions that are related to it. We also want to make sure that our tax dollars are being accounted for, that tuition dollars are being applied consistently to achieve that mission. And then we also want to be cognizant of the current economic environment that I talked about in the beginning. And then lastly, just making sure that we're stable and that our mission is sustainable in the long and forever future. William, you have a question?
Yeah, will the board be involved in re-evaluating the new strategic plan?
Absolutely. Yep. It passes through our governance system and then all the way up to the board level for them to consider. Yep. Good question. So next steps. We have 4 meetings in May. It's not a whole lot of time. I wish I had more time with y'all to kind of deep dive and consider our budget, but they are set in the 4 Wednesdays throughout May, starting on May 7th. Last year, we didn't need the second or the last session, if I remember correctly, but we do have those reserved. At 5 p.m., we'll get together. There's a few orders of business. Essentially, how it will work is the current chair of the board will gavel in, give a few comments, we'll do land recognition, and then there will be a process by which we designate and decide on who's going to be the chair and vice chair of the budget committee. Once that chair and vice chair has been decided, the chair of the board, try not to get tongue-tied here, will gavel out. So he will hand over the gavel to the chair of the budget committee. We'll gavel in, and then we'll begin the official budget hearing. We'll have a presentation for you. We'll talk about an overview of the proposed budget, a little more in depth of what things we're seeing and what we considered and how we had discussions with the folks here at the community college. And then we'll move forward on deciding what to recommend from what we propose, including the recommendations you make. And then ultimately your role as the committee is to vote on and approve a recommendation to the board to adopt the budget for FY26. Following the budget hearing meetings each Wednesday, well, not all of them, but the one on the 7th, and then the 3rd Wednesday of the month, there is a formal meeting of the board that begins at 6 p.m. You're welcome to stay. Kara and I will present a forecast on May 7th at that board hearing. And we'll also have a presentation of the FY24 financial audit, which might be interesting and to help guide your decision and your discussion. Those meetings are recorded, so if you can't make it, that's totally fine. You can go back and watch it on your own time. I'm happy to share the link to that recording if you aren't able to make it. We'll also have the final meeting in June, hopefully the first meeting of June, for the board and the budget committee to vote and adopt the budget moving into FY26. Any questions about the timing, the meetings, the roles and responsibilities, and so on?
Jonathan, I assume we get the copies of the budget proposals in PDF format?
Good question. So we are going to print, and we'll also share it in PDF electronic version. So you have your choice of whether or not you want a physical version and or both electronic and physical. So we're aiming to release that the week before the first meeting.
I realize this is probably a no, but is it possible to get them in Excel format, or is it?
Yes, that's true.
Possibly. Let me think about that.
Okay, thanks.
Amber, I think you had a similar question last year, if I remember.
I did, yeah.
Yeah, good thought. Yeah. Okay. And as promised, here's a whole bunch of information and links, mostly related to our board policies. We have duties and responsibilities. We have a budget officer, how we go about preparing it. There's definitions on what our requirements are for a reserve fund. I'm going to go through them just real quick. You can read the full language if you want, but I just want to point out the highlights, the ones that are important. The budget officer is technically Dr. Bolger. President Bolger is our budget officer. She presides on the board. She presides over the college. We help her make that decision as a committee through governance, through data and whatnot. But she's the one, by Oregon budget law, she's designated as the one to pass on the formal proposal itself. We have the internal calendar, which we talked about. There is a requirement that if we have one-time funds we can't use them for recurring operating funds, but we can use them to do things like pay off debt and realign our deficits on certain sub-funds, for example. An example of this is an ERTC tax credit that we applied for several years ago during COVID. It was a COVID funding, but we still have not received. Grant funds, they can't be used for recurring operational expenses. Capital reserve funds, we have this one and also BP 245. We are required by Oregon budget law to set, the board is required to set an ending fund balance that is, in a sense, a rainy day fund. Ours is set at 3%, and then our contingency funds are set at 2.5% of total expenditures on top of that. So if you add them together, think of it as our ending fund balance is required to be 5.5%, or if we have a $100 million budget, that's $5.5 million. That's our target. There are rules of engagement and protocol if it dips below certain amounts. It's between 9 and 11% of when we talk about needing to recharge our ending fund balance versus investing it. I'll let you read the language on those. A balanced budget is talking about not spending more than our current resources. So that includes the beginning budget, but also just being fiscally aware and responsible of what our out year forecast looks like, which you'll see more of in the coming presentations. And those are the highlights, I think. There's more in there, but I just wanted to point those out because those are important metrics that we look at when we set a budget. This is us. We're here at your convenience to answer questions, to help kind of guide the process, to guide you through your thinking, provide data, provide analysis for you to consider our budget, and to give us your sage and wisdom as financial experts in your respective areas. This is our contact information. And with that, I'm going to pause and stop, let you look at Tie the Titan here on the left-hand side, and ask any questions and have any discussion you want. We booked this time until 5 o'clock, so we have plenty of time to hang out. Thank you, Alejandra and Deja, for presenting. Larissa.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks everybody for presenting. That was a really helpful overview of the kind of the high level stuff. And I look forward to kind of diving into the proposed budget. I had a question about, I wrote it down because I know I'd forget if I didn't. There's a cap on growth in terms of the funds from the CCSF at 3%. Can you talk about, you mentioned that, Alejandra, I think mentioned that it's about equity amongst the community colleges, and can you talk a little bit more about what that is, what it does? Does it hamper LCC? Does it mean that if we have growth above 3% in expenditures, but that we have to balance that with tuition? Can you kind of fill out that picture a little bit more?
Yeah, in general terms, it doesn't mean that we govern back enrollment. It just means that it kind of pushes us towards being targeted and strategic about the areas that we do grow in. We don't go over the cap very often, just the nature of how enrollment has worked over the past few years. We have come close in the past couple of years because of the way that growth has happened. It's a kind of a convoluted formula about how they come up with the cap. But the idea is that they want to make sure that we're all kind of growing at the same pace and that they can allocate resources appropriately. Think of it as if one college ends up growing significantly more than another college, and it's just a straight formula of FTE times this certain amount, then they're going to end up allocating more of those resources to that college than the others. Each college is widely different in size and enrollment. So, for example, Treasure Valley Community College is very tiny compared to, say, us or Lynn Benton or Portland Community College. So what they do is they want to just make sure there's parity between the actual percentage growth and the dollar of the allocation. So when we go over the cap, one thing that we look at strategically is how much is that dollar amount in costs over what we get back from the state. And we just want to make sure that we can absorb that and that enrollment is consistent and that we're paying attention to it. if it's in a high cost area, how do we mitigate that strategically? Like I said, it doesn't happen very often, but it is just something worth keeping in mind from a policy perspective from the state. Does that help? Does that answer your question, Larissa?
I think so. Yeah, I think I spent a long time at U of O, and I remember the old OUS system where it was like all of the universities were kind of held in stasis against each other in a way. And I can understand the policy behind that, but I also, you know, as a budget committee member, I'm concerned about the impact to LCC's budget if that were to become a limiting factor. But thank you for embellishing on that.
Carly.
Yeah, you gave us a couple of kind of comparative or benchmarks against some of the other schools. I think just the amount of, I think, tuition rate or something like that compared to some of our peer group. Are there other, I'm sure there are other benchmarks you guys are looking at as you go through kind of evaluating the budget and the expenditures? I know it's a pretty daunting task, but a good example is, in the past, we've been a school kind of that has maybe some things the other schools don't, like a big nursing program versus some of the other schools, right, that don't have some of those more technical items. What I'm getting at is we're maybe more expensive for a reason, and do we feel like we all kind of understand what those reasons are? And then number two, are there areas that we think we need to work on, spend more money in certain areas because we have excellence in those?
That's actually a very astute question. And one of the things that we can call out, the reason that we have higher student fees, for example, is because we offer things like a health clinic, and we have international programs that's very engaged. We have student groups. We have more student groups and committees and councils of clubs than I think any of the other colleges. Each community college is slightly different. They offer different things. And when we do compare ourselves to other community colleges, it's usually not in a silo. We have good conversation and good connections through various affinity groups across the state when we talk about things like, I mean, to your example, a nursing program. Our nursing program is a very well established, very well known program for the state, and we generate a lot of nurses and doctors and medical students out of that program. Other colleges don't necessarily offer that. So when we talk about comparisons at that level, it really falls down to our VPs, our AVPs, and the deans and directors and their connections to work out the cost and the impacts and the economic drivers behind those programs. We're going to be doing more of that work in the coming year. Now that we have Kira on board and we have a strong leadership team and we just have a better understanding of where we stand with our finances, we're going to be looking more heavily at costing out what it costs to run a program. What is it in comparison to other institutions and other colleges, and trying to be much more efficient, much more targeted with our programming. So when it comes to the numbers, I'll say that that's probably beyond my pay grade, but we're going to be from the budget office looking at tying numbers and data and metrics to that. So that's a good question. So that answer your question. I kind of rambled through that one.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know that's kind of that's an involved question more on the operations into things, maybe just strictly the budget, but those operations things drive dollars and cents, as we know. Yeah, thank you.
Exactly. Yep, absolutely.
So Jonathan, if I had to guess, I would guess that educating a student doesn't cost the same for all of the degree programs. Like if you're you have a nursing student, I can't imagine it's the same cost to educate that student as it is, an English or a history major. Do you have differential tuition rates for those different majors within the college?
We do, and that you're right, it does cost different across different programs. There are threads across those programs. For example, a nursing program, the students are required to take biology and anatomy and physiology, A&P as they call it. I always mangle that word, but they do have differential fees for some of our programs. And that's another area that we're going to be paying closer attention to. What drives up a cost for a student to attend one of our programs, and is it set correctly? We have a framework that I'm hoping that we can revise and use more accurate methodology in the coming future. But generally speaking, the increase in student fees, we set it similarly to what the tuition increase is. So this year, it's generally speaking, we're assuming it's about a 3% increase for student fees across the board. Now, for a shop like our automotive shop, that means that could mean like a $10 per credit increase. But for nursing, that could be several $100s per credit per student, right? And so the impact is larger. That is something that we are thinking more about and trying to provide data around it. Yeah. William.
So I have two questions. One is, has any outreach been done to like either start or grow like donor programs for the more well-known programs like nursing, and for people that go on to maybe get some jobs where they have discretionary income and may want to, have some pride and contribute. But the other is like, I guess, resilience or reserves, like building out some sort of like, have you looked at an endowment or something like that? Where maybe like corporate or, big ticket donors might give some money to start off and then look at investing those funds to have some sort of reserve capacity beyond the reserve fund.
It's a good question. So we don't, let me answer your first question. I don't know about the specifics of where our individual programs have partnered with, but I know that we do have very strong leadership in most of our areas that have good community partners. We don't have an endowment that's associated on financially on the books on the LCC side, but we have a separate entity that's the LCC Foundation, and they have many endowments and many donors that offset some of the program costs. One good example I can think of is we have a very large endowment and investment program with Peace Health, and they provide roughly $500,000 for the nursing program to cover some of their nursing faculty staff. And also, we're restarting the respiratory therapy program within health professions, and they'll be covering part of that cost as well. So the total endowment investment from Peace Health is going to be about $800,000. So we do have many of those investments that go through the Lane Foundation, and we work closely with them to make sure that those transfers, the reserve comes back on our side. We're also looking more closely at grants. We're trying to shore up our grants, but now there's a lot of unknown at the federal level where grants might not be a strong option for the near future. But we are hoping that some of the foundations, some of the endowments, some of the donors, that those areas will step up in the near future to kind of replace some of those dollars. To get at your second question, William, about recharging and rebuilding our reserve on the general fund. Does that make sense? Does that help a little bit answer your question?
No, absolutely. Where can we get more detailed information on the LCC Foundation, and how is that reflected in like the budget document that we're going to receive?
So the LCC Foundation, they have a website out there that you can, I'll send the link to it as a follow-up to this email. The LCC Foundation reimbursements come back through on a specific account code within our finance system. So the way that works, I'm not a strong accountant. I do horseshoe budgeting and forecasting, so I do the crystal ball stuff. Kara can probably answer this question more precisely, but whenever the nursing program in this example, they have a specific FOP or a sub fund that they charge those dollars to. So those 4 nurses and the respiratory staff and their materials and supplies all get charged to a specific sub fund. They turn around and they essentially send an invoice to the LCC Foundation, and then for layman's terms, they cut a check back to us, and that comes back to offset the expenses on a revenue side, revenue account code. So that way they balance out throughout the year. So on the general fund, what we do is we reduce the dollars in the proposed budget, and shifted over what we know the total dollar amount for that investment will be over to a Fund 8 account. So it won't sit on general fund, it'll sit on our restricted grants and contracts fund.
And if I can just add to what Jonathan's saying, the foundation is a separate 501c3, so all of their funding runs through a separate entity and organization. So if you go to the foundation website, they have their own audit firm, they have their own set of accounting books. They essentially reimburse the college through a grants process, but they're a whole separate entity in terms of finances.
Good questions. Anyone else? Keep them coming. It's a good conversation. I learned at LCC through our faculty members that I'm supposed to count to 7 in my head before I move on. So I'm counting to seven to make it really awkward for us finance people.
Well, let me give you respite. Jonathan, are you in bargaining this year with any of your employee groups, and will that impact budget?
You could. We are in bargaining with our faculty union, and the classified union is also in bargaining mode through economic reopener to take a look at position classifications and pay. So it absolutely will impact the budget.
And does LCC directly bargain with the classified employees, or is it kind of like the state universities where everybody bargains with SEIU together?
We do direct bargaining, right, Kara? Kara knows more about the bargaining than I do at this point.
It's direct bargaining, not one contract. Yep.
All right, thanks.
Yep. Question. Anyone else? I'm going to count to 7. Okay. I counted to 6. I won't torture it out too much. We have one more orientation session scheduled for Monday. So we technically have to go through this presentation one more time for our other committee member. But what I can say is that if you want to come to that orientation again with more questions about the larger framework, right? Again, the proposed budget is not public, so we can't talk about the specifics of what we are proposing, but we can talk more about these larger economic questions and about the structure of our college. So if you want to come to that meeting, you can. You can also, Kara, correct me if I'm wrong, or Alejandra, y'all know the law more than I do. You can email us and follow up with general questions, and we can say yay or nay if we can answer it.
Yes, you can do that. You can save them for the budget committee meetings as well, if there's something else you come up with, but you certainly could email. And we just make sure that the committee members all receive the same answers. So if you ask something, we will just send it to the full committee, just for transparency.
Well, I want to thank you all for your time. I know that it's not easy to give up 4 Wednesdays in a lovely month of May, but I appreciate your input and your analysis and your thoughtful conversation ahead of time. Thank you to Deja and Alejandra for presenting with me. You'll see more of their faces. You'll see Kara during the presentations also. And unfortunately, you get to hang out with me a lot too. But overall, thank you. And we look forward to seeing you later on.
All right, bye. Thank you.
Thanks.